Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for giving up your time and joining us for today's session, which is 10 steps to creating a PR strategy. So hopefully by the end of the session, you're going to have the tools and the processes to create a clear and strategic PR plan. And I'm delighted to welcome one of our valued members, Nathalie Agnew. She's the MD at Muckle Media, and she's going to share today her area of expertise. So thank you so much, Nathalie. I would just ask you all to go on mute for the remainder of the call. If you want to can log any questions or observations. I'm recording the session, so I'll be able to share a copy with you back. So thank you so much, and I'll hand over to you, Nathalie.
Lovely, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to speak to you all. As mentioned this afternoon for the IOD webinar series, I am going to be talking to you about strategic communications planning, and the business I run is a PR and communications agency, and we work across all sorts of different sectors. So some of the things that we talk about today might be relevant to everybody, and some of the things might be slightly more relevant maybe to B2B versus consumer, for example. So feel free to ask.
I copied it into the calendar invite.
Now what we do, so we deliver communications, and that can be through PR, social media, and lots of other ways as well, and we'll be talking about some of those channels later on, and here are some of the awards we've won for our work over the past couple of years. Now, what we do when we work with a client, and what I'm going to be talking to you about today, is our strategic communications wheel. And this is something that we've developed in-house to allow us to go through all the stages of communications planning for a client. And we can apply this to any business, any brief. So it could be a business, also could be public sector, third sector. And it's really a detailed process we go through. Obviously today we've got an hour, so I'm going to give you a top line view of how the wheel works and give you a couple of tips for each section of things that are quite actionable that you could go away and deliver for your business tomorrow or today. So some tips and some hints and maybe some tools and things that you could be trying out. But then there's obviously a lot more depth we could go into as well on this. And what's so great about a wheel is obviously it goes all the way around. So we tend to start at the top on the insights section. However, at different times of your planning process, and we see planning as really an ongoing thing, which is why it's a circle and not a straight line, you can dip in and out and you can adapt. And I think right now in the situation that we're in, you know, adapting is definitely the word, and people are needing to adapt their plans, and particularly their communication plans, because the way that we're working at the moment has really changed, and we didn't expect this 12 months ago. So if you wrote a communications plan for your business a year ago, it's probably not very valid anymore, and it's probably just worth reviewing and rethinking things. So over the next kind of 40 minutes or so, I'm going to just take you on a whistle-stop tour of these 10 steps, give you some hints and tips, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Now, what I would like to start with, and it's about 2 minutes long, this video, and it's a campaign from New Zealand. And this campaign is kind of world-class example of strategic communications planning, and then the resulting campaign that came out the other end of probably quite a similar process to our process. The reason I want to share it, I think it's a really interesting one. It's really creative. But what's really great about it is it's built on a very clear insight. And that's the first thing we're going to talk about today is insights. So if you can watch this video, it's 2 minutes long, and if you can think about the communication planning that's gone into this, and then as we work through our 10 steps, we're going to come back to this case study and example and try and just talk a little bit about what the steps were and how this is so insight-led and strategic.
Nathalie, there's no sound. Is there meant to be sound?
Oh, sorry, is there no sound? That's not good. Sorry, just a second. There's no one in the office. Hopefully they don't mind me just making a bit of noise.
The Pedigree Child Replacement Program. When they move out, move on. Adopt a dog.
If your kids have left home, we have a solution for you.
Campaigners hope that empty nesters might find a suitable child replacement, a dog that needs a home. If your kids have left home, why don't you just get a dog to replace them?
Do you replace your kids with a dog? How's that for your Monday morning?
You're encouraging people who are feeling a bit sad about having an empty nest to get a dog.
Go on, mate. Go get it. Yes. Yeah, go on. Go on.
I understand the website matches dogs with people. How do you work it out? Is there a science to it?
Parents enter their kids' details and the software will match those characteristics with a dog that's looking to be adopted.
I went onto that website and I matched with a beautiful Border Collie cross.
You send in your kids' old stuff and they turn it into dog stuff.
And this is on the website now. They've taken a kid's jacket and they've turned it into a dog jacket.
All that crap you left in your room when you moved out, guess what? It belongs to the dog now.
The Child Replacement Program finds that magic connection point between dogs that need homes and homes that need dogs. And we think that's why it's been so effective for us.
I've got to say, I laugh. What's the response been so far?
The Pedigree Child Replacement Program. When they move out, move on. Adopt a dog.
Okay, so hopefully you could hear the sound there okay, but to give you just a bit more detail about that campaign, it's from Pedigree, and they came up with the child replacement program. So it's very much focused on people who were empty nesters and saying to them, if your children move out and they move on, they go to university or they start their own home, you can get a dog. So here is some additional content that they've created around this. Now, the first step of our wheel that we're going to talk about is insights. And what I like so much about that campaign is it's got a really clear target audience. So the target audience, very obviously for that campaign, is the empty nester group. So they've obviously done a huge amount of research and identified that a key point in people's lives where you are likely to get a dog and potentially adopt a dog is at that point when maybe your children move on and leave home, and you feel a gap in your life and decide to bring a dog. So there's a really clear insight there that people adopt dogs when their children leave home, and this entire campaign has been built around that insight. So it's a fantastic insight, and it's been really creatively delivered through the child replacement program. In terms of an actionable takeaway for your business, I think this is obviously the starting point of any campaign. It's about really getting to know your target audience. And if you have a product-led business, as an example, identifying at what stage is someone in your target audience likely to purchase your product or engage with your brand. And then really trying to profile your audience there. So I've provided some examples on the page here of ways that you could try and understand your audience better. Over on the far left, there are sort of research companies. So if you work in a specific sector, you could purchase a report that could be from Mintel, from Nielsen, or from Kantar. And then a lot of specific industries have research companies tailored around that industry as well. Now, these reports can be quite expensive, but if you look on the websites for these brands, if you don't want to buy a full report, a lot of the content that they put out is really relevant to those brands as well. So you'll quite often find blog posts that maybe summarize the latest report that they're putting out. So this can be a really good place to secure insights into your target audience. Another thing to try maybe is looking at your competitors. But what we don't want you to do is just go away and try and copy your competitors. So sometimes it can just be a good way to understand maybe what other people are doing in the market. And also, if you think about a competitor that's maybe not in your sector but serves a similar customer group, you could think about mirroring some of their strategies within your sector, and then it's different, but you're using some insights to deliver that. Focus groups can provide some really good qualitative research, and then you can also do customer research and interrogate your customer data that you might hold already. I would say when you're using customer data, I would be quite cautious about that, because if you have acquired the wrong customers for some reason, then if you start digging into their data and decide that all of your customers are middle-aged women who live in Morningside, for example, you might then find that actually that's just the customers you have, but maybe it's not the dream customer profile of those that you really want to be working with. So I would use that with caution. However, a good example of it would be something like the Tesco Club Card. So if you think about the Tesco Club Card, yes, it's a marketing strategy, but also it's given them really interesting data. So they're able to segment their customers in all kinds of different ways and then target them with really interesting content that's going to be based around things that they already buy. And there's loads of different tools that you can use that would use Google research. So on a really basic level, if you don't want to use a complicated search engine keyword tool, if you just go onto Google and type in some of the words that relate to your product or service, and using this example here, I've typed protein into Google. And then what I can see is the most common current search terms for protein. So if I'm looking to start a new protein business, this might tell me that actually protein pancakes are something that's emerging and up and coming. Obviously don't just use this as the only piece of research. You want to go and do some others around it. But it can give you just some really high level initial ideas around what people are searching for. Then you've got your customer kind of magazines and also trade magazines. So they can always be really good for finding and identifying trends that you could base your campaign upon. And then going a step further with the kind of internet research, there is Answer the Public. So this is an example here, and going back to the example that we were looking at around dog food, I typed dog food into Answer the Public, and it gives you a whole load of data there around the most common questions people are asking. And it uses why, how, will, where, can, and are. Now, I've done a bit of analysis of the answers that are coming up here. And quite often when you search for dog food, people ask questions about cats. So such as, would dog food make my cat sick? Will dog food kill cats, for example? So that's quite an interesting topic, obviously, that people are searching about. And if I was looking for a basis to build a creative campaign and I wanted to come up with something a bit different, then that's given me this initial idea of maybe I could do a campaign around dogs versus cats. So once you start going down that route, it just gives you a bit of direction and makes you start thinking about your content in a different way. So that's a starting point around insights. I'm happy to take questions throughout as I go through these 10 steps, or we can keep questions to the end. So maybe Kirsty, just keep me posted if there were any pressing questions that people wanted to ask at this point.
No, people were just reflecting on the same situation if their kids have moved out and
Oh,
they've
really?
now got...
Great, so I can't actually see the chat at this point, but lovely. Yeah, so it's a key time that people do think about dogs, so they've obviously got a good insight there.
Yeah, and just the other thing there, Nathalie, was people have mentioned, so we've got the information advisory service for IOD members.
Yes.
You get top quality market research reports, so for any members or indeed non-members who want to know more about that, just get in touch and we can share more on that as well.
Oh, lovely. That's really good. Yeah, so that's a great way to get some extra data. So moving on to our second part of our wheel is, we've got these insights now and we've really dug into our audience sector and we feel like we understand them. And more crucially, we've chosen a specific insight that we want to build our campaign around. So at this stage is when we start to build out the strategy. Now, I've provided a number of steps here and based it around the example again. So the communications objective should always be really tied back into the strategy of the business. And I think that's where sometimes communications can go wrong. So sometimes we'll speak to a client, a prospective client, and ask them what they want to achieve. And you know, they might say, oh, we really want to be on the front page of the Herald. And that's fine, but it needs to have a purpose. So this strategy section is about making communications really purposeful so that it's going to meet organisation objectives. So working backwards from the pedigree campaign, it's most likely that their business objective was that they were trying to sell X amount of dog food in New Zealand over maybe a quarter. And to translate that business objective into a communications objective, we've kept it quite simple there. And we've said that the communications objective was to deliver an integrated comms campaign that would help them meet that business objective. So it's quite an easy step there. Then we've taken these two key insights that we want to build the strategy around, which are empty nesters are dog owners and they have a disposable income, and that empty nesters replace their children with dogs. So two really key things that we can build a campaign on. So then in terms of a strategy, what we're looking to do is deliver the child replacement program campaign, which is the one they came up with. And that's in order to reach the empty nesters, encourage them to adopt dogs, which also supports Pedigree's separate corporate social responsibility plan, which is all around dog adoption. So they're really ticking off two things here. And then the hope would be that once people have adopted a dog, they're going to be a loyal Pedigree food buyer, because Pedigree's helped them to match to their dream dog. And then I think there's an added bonus on this strategy, which is, yes, it's targeted at empty nesters, but secondly, it's providing some really fun, interesting, creative content. So they are going to reach the wider audience there as well. But what's so nice about it is it does have a very clear audience of empty nesters. So then moving on from the strategy, which we've cracked already, we're going to look at reputation. So reputation can cover lots of different things. Sometimes it could be that there are misconceptions about your brand. So this quite often happens if you start off doing one thing and then you move into a new sector and you really change your positioning. You might need to do a communications campaign to try and address that reputational kind of mismatch. It can also happen maybe if you've been in a crisis situation. So if there's been some damage that's been done to your brand, you might want to really understand what that crisis situation was and try and take some steps within your comms program to try and improve the perceptions of your brand. And a really good way to do this, if you've got a Pedigree type budget, would be to do a brand survey. So you could go out to thousands of consumers within your target market and you could check if they know about your brand, and if they do, what's their perception of your brand. So as an example, Kantar, they do a consumer study, and I saw the results last week where they spoke to consumers about the brands they most love in Scotland, and it's previously been Iron Brew for many years, but Graham's Family Dairy had overtaken them. So that's quite a nice example of using a brand study really to sort of benchmark the work that you do, and it also lets you later on come back to deliver another one, and if your campaign's been successful, then hopefully your brand positioning is increased as well. I think thinking about the Pedigree example, they obviously would have that brand survey, and then they've also got their sales figures of their business as well. Again, there's lots of tools that you could use to do this. So on the right hand side here, I've just got a basic example, which is my business, Muckle Media. So in terms of search engine optimization, we want to be as high as we can for the term PR agency Edinburgh. And at the moment, we're around about the 9th position. So if I was to be delivering a big campaign over the next quarter to try and increase that, then I would be hoping that that number would change and it would go higher up the search engines. Another good tool that we use that would be accessible to everybody is brand mentions. So here's an example of a client that approached us looking to improve the perception of their brand. And when we did that search for them initially, we were finding that actually they got a lot more negative mentions than they do positive ones. So a clear kind of benchmark there for us is to come back to this maybe in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and hope that the positive work that we've been doing has shifted those positive mentions to become, sorry, other way around. And again, you can measure things like reach there as well. So that's a top line view of planning and of reputation. Going into planning, so a couple of things here. One is around campaign planning. So what we would recommend for your communications plan is to set out an annual plan and really try and give a big 12-month overview of where you are now, where you want to get to, and how you're going to achieve that. So that's probably much more of a strategic plan of the big picture stuff. It's important then to break that into maybe a quarterly plan that breaks it into sections and says this is how we're going to move towards our goal over the first quarter of the year, and then have a much more detailed monthly plan. And depending on your business and your brand and how you work, there's loads of different versions of what these plans could look like. Then on top of that, I think having a rolling content plan and channel plan is really useful, so that you know what you're doing and you can adapt that. That could even be on a weekly basis if you have a lot of content. Then on the right hand side, we've got this concept of key messaging. So for anybody that's new to key messaging, what we look to do here is we think of every time that you have the opportunity to communicate, whether that's through a media interview or a piece of social media content, you are trying to put across a key message. So the top one, this umbrella, is your very high level key message. And from this campaign, it is when your children leave home, get a dog. So that's everything that they do. They want it to say that message. Then sitting underneath that, you would maybe have up to 3 core messages. And these could break your message out into slightly different ways. So it may be that you've got different audiences that you're trying to influence in different ways, and you could deliver messages for each of those audiences. And then further below that is your proof points and your evidence. So examples of that would be like case studies are really good proof points, and maybe data as well can be really good evidence, and that could sit along and support many different messages. So that would be long-term planning, and long-term planning is really important because if you don't have a plan, how are you going to know when you get there? It's much like any other area of your business. You need to have a really clear strategic plan of if you're investing, whether it's time or money into this this area of your business, what's the objective? Where are you trying to get to? And how will you know when you got there? So that was the long-term strategic planning. But then it's also important not to be too fixed down, because if you tie down your quarterly plan and you say these are the things that we are going to do, and we're not going to keep our head up and we're not going to look and see what's going on in the world, you're likely to miss some opportunities and you might not be so relevant. So we always team our kind of long-term strategic plan with a much shorter term plan where we can see what's trending and we can jump onto opportunities. So here are 3 different opportunities that you could use. So on the left-hand side, we've literally got Twitter, what's trending on Twitter right now. So you could be regularly checking that and trying to identify if there's anything that's relevant to you. And you can also use various different tools so that you could set up maybe an alert, because you can't be expected to be on Twitter all the time looking at what's trending. So you could set up an alert so that if something that's really key hashtag for your brand, maybe it's hashtag healthy living if you own a healthy food company, you can find out when those things are trending, and then you can have some content that's already lined up to respond to those. And the second one is a platform that feeds into, it pulls out all the Twitter trends, but it lets you go back further, and it lets you be much more localized. So if you look at trends24.in, you can then choose your location. It doesn't need to be the location you're in. So if you have a business that's run out of Edinburgh but has interest in Leeds, for example, you could be looking at Leeds. And then it gives you loads of history of what was trending. So you could look maybe all the way up to yesterday, what was trending yesterday. Although obviously the further forward you can look rather than backwards, the better. Maybe another just tip for you if you're looking at dipping your toe into PR is there's a hashtag on Twitter which is journal request. Now this is used by a lot of different journalists who are looking for stories. So if you were to be following this hashtag, you might find some nice opportunities. And just from looking at it yesterday, there's a few kind of good ones that are just showing up as top. So you've got a journalist for the Telegraph magazine who's looking for strong personal stories about men and women who have been through a major turning point. So as business owners, maybe you had a big turning point and it resulted in you starting this wonderful business that you've got, and you've got a really nice story to tell there. And if so, you could be pitching it to Fiona Cowood and hoping that you might get into the Telegraph. You've then got a new features writer at the Sun. So I would say this is all really accessible. As a communications agency, obviously day in, day out, we're doing this. So we have a lot of, more expensive, more complex tools behind the scenes that we use. But what I wanted to show you today were some kind of simple ones and just ways that you could try and get your brand out there a little bit without huge investment. So then thinking about capacity, so with the pedigree example, that was delivered by an ad agency, but it did have clear PR to it as well. So it may have come out of a PR agency, it may have come out of ad, but they all would have worked really closely together. And it was managed by an in-house team there. So if you are thinking about how you manage the capacity that you have and how you deliver your communications, I thought this could be quite a good table to fill in, where you could think about all the different functions within your communications and marketing. As the business leader, along the left-hand side here, if there are things that are, clear skills of yours or things that you're really passionate about and that you want to own, you could list them in here. If you do have comms and marketing colleagues and people that work for you delivering comms and marketing, you could give them all a named column and put their responsibilities in here. And then if you were looking to outsource what you do as well, you could list in here the things that maybe you don't have the in-house skills for. And I would recommend, if you're looking at outsourcing, it's either for skills that you don't have in-house and, to tap into extra expertise. Sometimes working with an agency can be really good just for fresh ideas. So you could have somebody really skilled in-house, but they could use an agency just to come up with extra ideas and get a bit of external perspective. And it can also be a really good way to access some more expensive talent, but without an annual salary. So you could just tap into the agency for the stuff that you need. And there's maybe less long-term commitment there than hiring a full comms team. So this could be quite a good way to start to just identify if you have any gaps in your capacity. And the other thing to do at this point is to think about your budgets as well and allocate budgets so that you have the budget capacity to deliver the communications that you need to meet your objectives. So moving on now to stakeholders. This is a really nice example that I found over the weekend for United Utilities. And it actually looks quite like my wheel, so I don't know who did it first. But United Utilities have broken down their stakeholder groups into 10 different areas, and they've colour-coded them all as well. So obviously, as a utility company, they do need to be really careful about their stakeholder engagement, particularly with things like their regulators and environmental partners. So maybe if they were in Scotland, how would they engage with SEPA, for example? So this is quite a nice example. And if you don't have this already for your business, it would be worth just really trying to think and categorise all the different stakeholders that play some part of needing to know information about your business. So that could be a really good starting point, is maybe to take the United Utilities example and then adapt it for your organisation. And then depending how important stakeholder communications is to you at this point. So if, for example, you are building a new factory, then stakeholder communications maybe becomes a little bit more important. And also if you're going through a crisis as well. So day-to-day stakeholder comms is important for every organisation in different ways, but particularly if you're going through some change, then I would really probably put some extra effort into your stakeholder management. And what we really like is a power and interest grid, which is on the right hand side. So what you're doing here is you're taking the information from the left hand side. So who are the core stakeholders? And ideally you would then start to write them down as well. So depending on how much depth you want to go into, you could literally name all of your top 50 customers, if, for example, all of your employees, all of your investors, and then start to put them into this grid and really identify. On the left hand side, you've got power. So how powerful are they? If you were you know, the number one investor and you hold a great number of shares and a controlling shareholding over the board, then you would probably be high in power and very high in interest as well. So you would pop them up on the top right hand side in this section, which is engage and consult. Equally, if you were the contractor that provides pencils to your business, yes, you need the pencils. It's important they arrive on time. It's important to get them for a good price, but they're relatively replaceable. Hopefully no one sells pencils on this call and tells me off. And then in terms of interest, it's probably, you know, relatively small. So your pencil supplier probably is in the monitor section and probably quite far to the left in the bottom. Now, once you've developed this grid, it's a really good way to consider for every communication that comes out of your organisation, or how are you going to reach each of the people in each of these boxes. Now, the monitor people, they're probably just picking up your information via Twitter or something, or maybe not even as much as that. And your keep informed people, maybe they get an email newsletter, or maybe they're hearing about you through the media or regular briefings. And these ones that are more powerful but less interested, again, that could be regular newsletters or regular calls, or some other form of communication. Maybe it's keeping your website updated so that there's a project page and they can know what's going on. And then what's really key is your engage and consult. And generally that's going to be your top customers, probably your employees, because I would hope that you all value your employees and see them as powerful people within your organization. I would say, however, when you do this, there is a tendency that you start with everybody in this top right hand box. So if that is the case, I would suggest you then go back and reanalyze it and just try and move people into other boxes, because you can easily start to think that everybody's really, really powerful and really interested. So it's worth getting another perspective from within your team on this as well. The pedigree example, I think they would have all the usual key stakeholders, but they've maybe got some charity stakeholders there as well. So they have a charity partner that they work with on their adoption program, and there could be maybe some government issues there around adoption. So there could be something around dog adoption, kind of lobbying for different laws as an example. So this is a really interesting part of communication planning. And although it takes quite a bit of time, I think if you're delivering big change campaigns, investing a bit of time up front on your stakeholder mapping can make a huge difference to the efficiency of how you deliver your messages back through to those stakeholders. So we purposely don't talk about content and channels until we are quite far into the planning process. And the reason for that is we really want to be strategic in the first place. So again, sometimes clients will come to us and say, you know, can you look after our Twitter page, or can you get us into the newspapers? And this is really about stepping right back from that and having a really strategic plan initially of who you want to talk to and what you want to tell them, as kind of big goals. And then that's when you start to break it down and create great content and get it out to the right people using the right channels. So that's why we don't talk about that until we're quite far around our reel. But thinking about the pedigree example, they've got some fantastic content, and I think having such a simple but creative campaign idea, you know, really made it quite easy then for them to come up with loads of nice ideas. So they had a landing page on their website. You could go on there and enter details about your children who have left home, and it would then match you to a pup that was a bit like your children. So not only is that really engaging for the person that's on there, but it's also giving you some really nice content. So you can imagine people then sharing it across their own social media channels, or maybe sending it on to their kids to say, you know, now you've gone to university, I'm going to replace you with a Rottweiler or something. They created some really nice video content. This was a multi-channel campaign. So we specialise in communications, but very much in a multi-channel way. So this ran across, you know, PR, social media, TV advertising, and so on. Something I really liked was the visuals I showed at the beginning, which were competitions where if you signed up to adopt a dog, you were entered into a competition, and you could post them your children's duvets or jumpers, and they would turn them into dog clothes and dog beds. So again, it's really creative, and it's encouraging what we call user-generated content. So if that had been me and I received the dog bed made out of my children's duvets, that's definitely something that you're going to be sharing on social media channels and so on. And I imagine they probably targeted some influencers as well with that idea. Obviously, we talked about your employees being really important stakeholders too. So you have that internal content. They had the charity partnership. They had a huge amount of social media content going out, and then a whole lot of other things as well. So again, thinking about your planning, what you would want to do here is put together a content plan and try and flesh that out in depth at the beginning, but then also be reactive and try and respond. And not, you know, communications these days is not a one-way channel. It's not a broadcast tool. It's about engaging with your audience and working closely with them to communicate and to create communities. I was just going to touch on a few things that I think people could take away and try themselves if you haven't already, in terms of content. So bottom left is thinking about brand guidelines. So this is taken from Canva, which I'll talk to you in a moment about. But you've obviously got your logo, so then you can know exactly what colours they link into, and make sure that your entire team are familiar with the colours that your brand uses, and then having brand fonts and guidelines. And that's going to provide you with some real consistency across your communication channels. On the top right hand side, this is a screenshot from Canva. Probably lots of people are familiar with Canva, but if you're not, it's a really good way to build particularly social media content and web content. And the example here, I typed into the search, chocolate, and it's provided me with a whole load of pre-made content about chocolate. So it's all editable. So I'd be able to jump into this and add my own brand. I can change the colors to reflect my brand. I can add my address and my Twitter handle and adapt maybe what the promotion is. And I've got this pre-made content that looks really, really smart and graphic designed. So it lets you do graphic design without being a graphic designer, really. So that's quite a nice example of a good tool to use. Relatively cheap. I think it's about £10 a month for a paid for subscription, and there is a free version as well, but it's just a bit restricted. And then a step on from that, for anybody that's already good with Canva and wants to try some new things, is Slidey by Promo. So they let you create video content much in the same way that Canva lets you create graphic design. So this example was for an accountant. So I typed in accountancy, and it's going to give you a video there about, you know, are you having a hard time with your paperwork? And then you could put the details in for your accountancy firm and create a nice video advert to use on your social media. And I'm sure everybody on the call knows how important video is these days in content. Using video, I think you're 30 times more likely to get onto the front page of Google. So it's a really important type of content to have. So those were some examples on content, and then moving into channels. So we've started thinking about content, we've started about thinking about what we want to share, and now we need to think about how we're going to reach our consumer or our target audience. And the model that we follow is called PISO. So it's P for paid, E for earned, S for shared, and O for owned. And then within that, there are some areas where things cross over. And I'm always really pleased to see that reputation, which effectively is one of the key things that PR looks after, is right in the middle there. So this covers a lot of different channels. And if anybody is interested, I'm happy to share this deck with Kirsty's if you want to have a think about how your communication fits into these channels. Now, this isn't a tick list, so it's not a case of you need to be across all of these channels at all times. It's more a set of things that you can look at and identify which one is the best channel to achieve your goal. So please don't be scared by this and think you need to do everything, because you don't. But there's a huge list here, so this is quite a good starting point of really thinking about how you can engage with different channels to reach your audience. So crisis, obviously really key, and I think I could speak for days about crisis communication planning, so I'm just going to touch on it today and then we'll go to questions. But I think there are some clear crisis opportunities within the Pedigree campaign. Obviously, there was a risk there when they launched that campaign around child loss, so there could have been a negative backlash to this campaign. So I'm sure they considered that risk and decided to go ahead with it, and they would have had contingency plans, I'm sure, in case it wasn't well received. Also dealing with adopted dogs, there could be big issues there, you know, if they were to help somebody to place an adopted dog and it was to injure somebody, as an example. So I think it's really about thinking about your risk register and making sure not only that every marketing campaign and communication campaign that you launch, you think about the risks, but also think about the risks to your wider business, just day to day. So we've got a kind of 4-step process that we follow within crisis, which is the planning stage. So that's really trying to avoid getting to a crisis, but also making sure if there is going to be a crisis that you are as well prepared as you can be. That could be through running simulations. It's definitely having a clear crisis manual that's got everybody's contact details and a process that you were going to go through. And crises do tend to happen at night time and at weekends and things, so even just having all the contact details for everybody that would be involved in a crisis response is a really good document to have as a first step. Then monitoring, so just looking out for any crisis and issue that might arise, responding to the crisis, and that's going to be very complex, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that right now. And then post-crisis, so if there has been an issue and your reputation has been damaged, how are you going to respond to that? And then finally, we're looking at measurement. So measurement's really important, and again, we've talked about this being a wheel, so you don't just measure and move on. You want to be measuring constantly and almost in real time. Now, on the right-hand side are some of the measures that the Pedigree campaign used. So one of the things they were trying to do was increase dog adoption, and they had a really clear increase there, 824% increase. That's a fantastic stat to have against your campaign. They had more inquiries in 6 weeks than they did in the prior 2 years. So again, fantastic results. But potentially more importantly for the brand and for, you know, thinking about that investment they've made in the campaign, they had a 16% sales increase in that market, which was really just growing at 1%. So there was really clear measurement at the end that campaign not only delivered on the corporate social responsibility objectives around increasing dog adoption, but actually there was a wider sales benefit there. So thinking about ways that you can measure what you do with your brand, thinking about media monitoring. So at the moment, do you know if your business is mentioned in the Herald tomorrow? Not all of this goes online, so quite often businesses are mentioned, and if they're just using Google alerts, you might be missing out. So it is worth thinking about working with third-party providers to have your brand measured and monitoring for your media mentions. The other benefit there is you can also monitor your competitors or your key customers, or maybe if there's a specific member of parliament that's campaigning something that's going to impact your business, you could be following things like that as well. So there's a number of different companies out there that offer media monitoring. Thinking about measurement again, so rather than just measuring reach, which we have provided there, I think really important to tie it back to outcomes, not just outputs. So it's not about how many press releases you've delivered or how many tweets you've sent out. It's about sales. It's about visits to your website. Potentially it might be about behaviour change or people taking an action, or it could be people signing up to a programme or signing up to your newsletters. So think back to those objectives that we discussed at the very beginning and consider how you can measure those. If anyone's really interested in measurement and how you can measure your communications, AMEC, which is the Industry Association for Measurement of Communication, they have Barcelona 2.0 principles, and they've actually just updated it to the Barcelona 3.0 principles as well. So that's worth looking at if you're interested in measurement. And then another tool that's quite accessible, I think the starting package is about £60 a month, is Coverage Book. So if you are generating media coverage for your business and you want to analyse it, this is an example from a campaign that we delivered for a client where it was a crowdfunding campaign. So you can start to measure this and maybe report it back to the board at board meetings, or use it in other ways, maybe as a benchmark, so you can look back in the years to come and see if your communications is going up or down. And Coverage Book lets you log all your coverage, and it analyses the reach for you. But that was, I guess, a bit of a whistle-stop tour through our communications wheel. So I was going to open up now to questions.
Thank you, Natalie. That was excellent. Lots of hints and tips. Can I just, there's one in the chat, and if I could kick off with one, if that'd be okay. So just going back to the part you were talking about, capacity and budgets. And bearing in mind, a lot of our members that are perhaps on the call today might be, one person in the business or a couple of people. What's the kind of top tips for them? Because they can't obviously do all of these things. Is there some key parts you would pull out for them?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the strategic part is really, really key, because a lot of businesses do spend a lot of time maybe doing things like, Twitter and Facebook pages, and sending out maybe email newsletters to small groups of people. So I would say you can use a lot of time doing these things, and if they're not landing in front of your audience, you're actually not really getting the best value back from your time. So if you're delivering your own communications, I would think about your time as being a cost and an investment, and make sure that whatever you're doing is the stuff that's going to get the best return. And that does come back to the strategy. So if you can just take a little bit of time out of your business and think through what are you trying to achieve there? What's your business objective? How can you use communications to reach that? Who's the audience, and what's the message you want to get to them? And then I think that gives you a really nice framework to pick and choose what activity you invest in and what activity you deliver. So again, if you're measuring, if you can find a way to measure, let's say you're spending 3 hours a week on social media content, try and find a way to measure the return on that, and whether that is bringing in customers or inquiries or leads, or improving your brand profile. And hopefully then you will be able to make sure that what you're doing is giving you big results.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions coming in now. So one which is really relevant to today, when you're managing through a crisis, for example, COVID, are there other messages you would want to weave into the content that would prove positive to the brand, and you should adapt your messaging quickly?
Yeah, so I think I get the question. I think so you're saying you're already communicating about COVID. Should you weave other messages in there as well? Is that the question?
I think so. Aidan, are you still on the call? Is that what you were meaning?
Yeah, I was thinking just about, Nathalie has been great, so thank you for. I was just thinking about an experience that I've had with an international educator.
Okay.
Where basically COVID was closing down colleges all over Africa, etc., for businesses, and they came up with a brand line. We've left no student behind. So they quickly adapted to the current situation to reach out to the students as opposed to the colleges, and saying that they wouldn't leave any student behind for exams, etc. And that has proven to be a huge boost to them in countries in Africa. So they adapted their message very quickly to take account of the impact that COVID was having. And I'm just wondering if you've had other experiences of how quickly you can adapt your messaging.
Definitely. So I think that's where, again, you were asking earlier, somebody was asking about, you know, the basic things you should do if you don't have much resource. And I think that comes back to key messaging, which you've just mentioned, Aidan. A good example of that would be Richard Branson and Virgin Trains. So his key message for Virgin Trains at one point was, you know, we've safely delivered, I can't remember the number, let's say 50 million passengers. And he used to say that constantly. So whenever he launched a new train, he would update the number and add on to it. But he would be talking about, you know, we've safely delivered 50 million passengers from A to B. And there was a really unfortunate, difficult time when a train came off the rails and someone sadly lost their life. And Richard Branson was at the side of the train tracks and speaking to kind of live media. And he actually went back to his key message and he said, you know, and he was clearly really upset about it, but he said, you know, this has never happened to us before. We've safely delivered all these customers, you know, from A to B. So I think that's another good example of where the key message remains the same, but obviously the situation and the delivery of it really needs to change. So there would be times in a crisis where your key message might be less relevant and you might need to completely adapt it. But a lot of the time your key message can remain the same and be delivered in, you know, the positive and the negative times.
Thank you, Natalie. Okay, so Emma's asked a really good question. If you're starting on your journey in business, how do you go about building your reputation?
So that's a good question. It would depend on your industry and what you do. But I would say try and focus on a niche initially, potentially. If you understand your audience and you have a really clear target audience, the best thing to do is really just try and think, where do I find my audience and where do they go? So potentially doing something like audience personas, which I didn't talk about earlier, but can give you really good insights. So if you were to create some personas of who your audience is, and then try and go where they go. So to give you an example from my industry, there's a load of PR events that you can go to. We're members of the CIPR, the PRCA, the Marketing Society. And when you go to those places, you meet other PR and marketing people. So that's all very good. But it's full of other PR and marketing people, and it's full of other agencies as well. So my chances of going to a PR or a CIPR event and meeting a prospect that's looking to buy from me and wants to raise my profile, I think it's still worth doing some of that. But if I specialize in fintech PR, then I think going out to the fintech events and trying to get under the skin of how fintech people work and learn and build their businesses, maybe joining a fintech organization, association, and trying to do some speaking opportunities there, that's probably going to be a better use of my time, and it's particularly in the early days. So I would say be really focused. Don't try and do everything. Try and build your brand into a clear audience.
Thank you for that, Natalie. Another question on how important is your website compared to other forms of active communication? There's so many channels now, so many social media platforms. How important is the website still?
So it probably is still really important, but it does depend upon which industry you're in and what your strategy is really. So for some people, the website's crucial because maybe you're an e-commerce business and you're trying to sell product directly through your website. If you are a professional services company, maybe your website is somewhere that people go to kind of check your credibility. And if they think that you've got a nice slick website, that's going to help you to sell that premium professional services offering to them. I would say that is why when I talked earlier about content and channels, we kept that quite far down. So we don't start thinking about channels until quite far into the strategy, for a reason. So there's another question about LinkedIn, for example, as well, that I can see in the chat saying, there's so many options out there. And I would say to kind of take those two questions together, it comes back to what I said about identifying who your audience is and going where they go. So if you sell women's clothing, then maybe you want to build your brand on LinkedIn a little bit, but maybe it's Facebook or Instagram that's going to sell your product. If you're an accountant, maybe LinkedIn is going to be a better place for you and having a good website. But I would say every brand is different and every strategy is different. So choose your channels and do them well, rather than trying to be across everything and not managing to do it well.
Thank you, great answer. So there's another one here from Sarah, and she's saying, Nathalie mentioned a number of ways of being able to plan out the long and short-term objectives. Are there any helpful sample plans and tools that could be recommended?
So again, I would suggest thinking through, I mean, you could certainly take some of the content I've provided today. So if you were to take our wheel and go through those 10 steps, that would give you a bit of a process where you think about all those 10 different areas. And then when you get to channels, there was a huge list of channels there. So you could create a plan from the back of that. If anybody uses, my brain's gone completely dead, the thing with the Kanban project planning tool, I can follow up on it. But then quite a lot of these different project planning tools also have like communications and marketing plan templates. So I could try and dig one out, Kirsty, and include that in my email to you later.
The good thing is I'll be sharing Nathalie's contact details with everyone as well after the session. So please, Nathalie, you're open to everybody.
Yeah, of course. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, if anyone wants to link in with me.
So is there any final questions from the audience that you'd like to ask of Nathalie? No, no more questions on the chat. I can't see everybody at the moment. Anybody putting their hands up or want to come off mute? You're very welcome. No, okay, I think you've covered that. Lovely. Thank you so much, Nathalie, for your time. That was really good, and I hope everybody's been able to get some top tips or tools or things that they can think about in their own business. I think for me it was about review and rethink your existing plans, especially in the current crisis. It's a crucial piece of advice. So thank you so much for that. As I said, I've recorded the session and I'll share it with everyone, and Nathalie will share her contact details. There you are on the slide. Thank you. And just a last little call out, we have our Director of the Year Awards next week for IOD Scotland. I know a lot of people on the call are not from Scotland, but if you'd love to join in the celebrations and get busy on social media, and we'd love for you to join. So it's the 8th of September in the evening, and we're having a cook along, and we've got a Director of the Year cocktail. So hopefully a few of you can join us for that evening, celebrate leadership success across the country. So thank you again for taking the time to join us. And if you've got any questions at the end, please just drop me an email. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. See you later.
Thanks, Nathalie. That was great.
Bye-bye. Thank you.